Hello, welcome to First Look. Back outside. It's cold, but it's not like cold. So I'm like, give it a shot. I need to get out of the house. If you know my week, I've had a weird one because people were sick in my household and all that kind of fun stuff, and I got a little bit of it. We're all kind of on the mend now, so that's good. But we're moving forward into this week, and we have something special for you this week, which we've been, believe it or not, thinking about in one way or another for like a year. And it's just the beginning of something. So if you're new to this, let me clue you into what we're talking about. So in, January of 1926, the congregation that we know and love, which at some point was under a different name. It was Highland, but I'm missing a part of the name. That you and I know and love as Northmont, became a part of Pittsburgh Presbytery. But all of the work that went into making that congregation into a reality started 100 years ago in 1925 in January. The first folks started to gather and do all the planning and the work and figure out where they were going to meet and how they're going to organize themselves, all the things that you do to become a new congregation. At the time, Pittsburgh was expanding out, and so they were reaching a new neighborhood, a new demographic, and and that was all wonderful and exciting and everything. So what we decided to do was, instead of just having one day where we celebrate the 100th anniversary, we decided, why not have a year of remembering and looking forward and doing that, but instead of making it feel like something that's just in the past, let's make it as present as we can. So we're doing some things in worship, some things that are more historical, but we're also inviting back people who have worked and loved Northmont throughout the years, people who are near and dear to the folks who are a part of this congregation. And throughout the year, you're going to get to hear some of those voices, and we have some events planned and that kind of thing. And if you've been in worship the last several weeks, you've heard me talk about this. But the first thing that we're doing here on the 19th is we're celebrating the beginning of that work with a special service dedicated to just how things got started. And one of the ways we'll be doing that is by with special music and liturgy and some different things in the sermon that I'll be doing, which I'll let you know about on the day of. But it's just a kind of a way of making what we remember into something that feels alive and feels relevant to who we are and what we're doing today. So that's the idea. And not too often do you get a chance to celebrate something for a whole year. And so we thought, why not try that? Why not do it? Because you only turn 100 once. So this week we're doing something. The sermon isn't following anything else. The scripture and sermon that we chose, I'm going to turn around here, is with respect to the idea of coming together as a congregation. And so the scripture that I'll be using is from 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And the whole idea is, it's a scripture that you know well, and obviously since I'm walking around, I'm not going to be able to read it to you. But it talks about being of one body and one spirit. And so I will, you have the exact scripture in the email that I had for you. So you can look that up and read along what that scripture is. But I will pause now in case you want to read it. So I'll do my pause face. And you're back. Okay. So, as I'm thinking about this scripture, I kind of looked at I was looking at not only the fact that it comes out of 1 Corinthians, but I was trying to, of course, think about it in terms of what would it mean for a group of people to come together to start a congregation. Because this wasn't one of the things that this wasn't started by a couple of pastors. This was started by, I think it was like 35 just people in the neighborhood, people who lived nearby. Maybe they went to church somewhere nearby and they thought, oh, this should be a congregation up here. So they started to work together to make this happen. And I can't imagine the work that would have had to have gone into that. To get 35 people to agree on something, to work out plans and money and how they were going to get this off the ground and what they were going to be dedicated to and what their kind of presence would be like. I don't know if that was done in the same way in the 20s as it would be now, but I guess I need to stop saying the 20s. We're in the 20s again. We're in the 1920s. But today it'd be hard, I think, to get something like that off the ground. You know, what kind of congregation it would be like, what would the feeling would be, how would we worship, what would things look like. There's so many things that go into it. It's really hard to kind of imagine. But maybe it was more modest. Maybe it was just, well, we'll get together. We need a Presbyterian church here. We'll call a pastor and that'll be it. And the pastor who came, we have met his family. His last name was Smith. I'm forgetting his first name now. But Reverend Smith, I can't imagine what it would be like to be called to a church that was just opening. You know, what kind of support would you have to have? What kind of confidence would you have to have that this was going to work? You know, because you're dedicating something, you know, you're dedicating a part of yourself to making something happen. You don't necessarily know these people or this community. Everything is brand new. There's no history, but at the same time, it's like, well, there's no history. There's no, you haven't made any mistakes yet. You haven't, nothing is broken yet. So something about that must feel like a really fresh start. But as I was looking at this scripture, at some point, so this is in 1 Corinthians. Of course, at some point, that was true for the church in Corinth. And I don't know how long the church in Corinth had been there whenever Paul visited. But my guess is not very long. I mean, certainly less than a generation. And one of the things they were working on, as you've heard me say, First Corinthians is one of those books that's, I preach out of often, is is a beautiful book when it comes to exactly what we're talking about, which is trying to find common ground and trying to create unity and trying to, figure out our differences. And the church in Corinth had it in spades, which is why, as you've heard me say before, Paul works with them on the words of institution for communion, making communion standardized. Here's what you serve, here's what you do, here's what you say. Making that something that was held in common. And we still do a version of that now. And he did so because there was disparity. And so let's create something important. Let's create a sacrament that uses common language and that says what it is that we believe in one voice. And, that's something that we're still working on now. Still trying to understand how we do that now. And, this week I've been kind of thinking about the challenge of difference. And, we're moving into kind of a unique time of our existence, in the sense that we have an inauguration of a president coming up. That inauguration happens to be taking place on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And the players involved could not be more different, regardless of where you stand, politically or otherwise. And then to think about who Martin Luther King was and what he represented, and the work that he did, and not only as a pastor, but as a political figure in the world. That's a lot to think about and to get your mind around at one time. And we kind of treat these moments as kind of maybe a little opportunity for a slice of unity. But we also recognize as realists that that's not ultimately what they end up feeling like. There's still so much difference and so much separateness in the world. It just is. And it's not just in the United States, it's everywhere. With more information and disinformation and the ability to share opinion, our differences are very much at the forefront. And my gut says is that there were great differences in the 1920s as well. We're in a very different type of period, and I don't have to try to explain what that period was, but not only in the United States, but the world in general was a very different place. And there was a number of things that I could point to that would have been something that for us to kind of wrap our minds around. We were in between world wars. There was suffrage. There was, the list goes on and on of things that we could point to in that time period that we were trying to work out, and I'm sure had very different opinions on. And that congregation came together in that period of time. And I think often about that unity piece, that the coming together. There's many gifts in one body, and sometimes it feels like that's kind of a big, I don't know, sometimes I feel cynical about it, that, well, we can talk about unity, but realistically, we just either stay with people and only talk to people that agree with us on the most important things that we care about, or we avoid those subjects altogether and go along to get along. That's really the only two options. Surround yourself with like-minded people, or surround yourself with people that you like and then just avoid the subjects that you would disagree on. And I would certainly be lying if I said that I didn't do that personally and professionally. Because when you're a pastor, I don't care where you're a pastor, that happens. Churches that are more right-leaning, you're always going to have people that are going to feel like they're not doing it enough or too much, or whatever. Churches on the left, same thing. Churches in the middle, you're always looking at, both sides of a coin. And, there's this, I think this passage speaks to our capacity for working on those things. Our capacity for trying to maybe find a third way. And maybe there's fourth and fifth and sixth way, but that maybe somewhere in there, despite the differences that we have, that maybe we find ways of talking about them that head towards solutions. If you thought one way about immigration and I thought a very different way about immigration, we could just not talk about that, and we could go back to talking about sports or whatever we talk about that we can find common ground on, or we could work on it, because maybe that's how solutions get done. Maybe if enough people talk with each other with honesty and integrity and in a non-defensive way, maybe that's how things actually get done. I don't know. We haven't figured it out yet. We certainly hadn't figured it out in 1925. I'm not sure that we are any better at it in 2025. But the other thing that this passage kind of points out pretty clearly is what everyone brings to the table. That there's a diversity of gifts. That's one of the pieces of this scripture that I think is paid attention to a lot for good reason. And in that, even when we all tend to disagree, and even if we have a difference of opinion, we also all bring something different. Some of you are good at things that I am not good at, and maybe I'm good at things that some people don't feel as comfortable with. And one isn't better than the other, which is what the scripture basically says. You can't have a functioning gathering without people who are prophetic, or people who are able to speak in tongues, or people who are able to serve in this way, without other people who are also able to interpret those things and understand those things and decipher those things. That's important. And it's, I think, especially, it's one of the things I think about a lot too. We're getting ready for our annual meeting, and as a part of that annual meeting, of course, you have officers that are elected, a slate of folks who are received and agreed upon by the congregation. And I think one of the incredible things about being Presbyterian, whether you're Presbyterian in 2025 or 1925 or 1825, is that um, all of those people bring something recognized to the table. It's not just, well, I have this ability and we all take your word for it. It's like what happens is that we recognize something in a person and say, we have witnessed this in you and we want you to share it with us. And there's always been something extremely powerful about that. That people approaching someone else and saying, I see this in you and I want you to share it with us. That, I think, is probably one of the most profound things that we do. And we take it completely for granted. And I think I've tried to make that one of my go-to things I talk about as extraordinarily important. Because to say to another person, unprompted, I see this in you and I need you to share it with us. And for that person to, even if they aren't sure, say, yeah, okay, I trust you. Let's do this. We have that happen all the time. We ask someone to serve in a certain way. And that person will say, sure. I don't really know what that means yet, but you'll tell me. Because they have some level of trust that this group of people who was, talking about them when they weren't there, all said to each other, you know who we should ask is so-and-so. Oh yeah, so-and-so, they'd be great. And here's why they'd be great. And then you get to ask that person and tell them, we all see this in you. We all love this about you. We all think you're great in this way. Would you share more of that with us? And that person just on some level has to trust that that's true. And then works it out as they go. And I've always loved that. And I think that part of this passage that we see here in 1 Corinthians, I think really speaks to that. That, all of you have different gifts. All of you come from different backgrounds. All of you come from different perspectives. And yet together we can do this. And that, I think, is always where we fall short, is when, well, you think this and I think this, and that just shuts down the conversation. When conversation shuts down, then nothing is going to happen. And the only way that anything will prevail or anything will move forward is probably because someone has enough power or influence or something to just make it happen. And nothing overtly positive comes from that. So, I assumed that was true whenever those 30-some people gathered to form the congregation that we now know as Northmont. I assume that some of them felt very equipped to do the legal parts or the financial parts. Some people felt very equipped in terms of how to think about property. Other people probably felt very equipped to talk about, the worship or the polity, the Presbyterian part of it. They knew that part really well. And then other people who started may not have felt like they could do anything. They didn't know anything about starting a congregation or being a part of something like that. They had no clue what they were doing. But they were asked, hey, we think we should do this. will you help us? We think that you're someone who could help us. And they just had to kind of trust that on some level. And that's the part of the story that I wish I had access to. But we can at least imagine, think about that, what that would be like now. So, as we journey on here and start this trek towards 100, I appreciate you going along with us. I really do hope that you find the coming year at Northmont as grounding and energizing and hopeful. That there's some reminiscing that happens, but that we don't get caught reminiscing for too long. That we take the lessons of our past, the good ones, the wonderful ones, and the ones that weren't. There's plenty of things I'm sure we'll talk about over the course of this year that we're forced to remember what's true that wasn't great. And then we'll wrestle with all of it and try to be better on the other side of it. So, for now, thank you for taking my little walk with me. I hope you have a good week. I hope to see you this Sunday. Please come in person if you can. The music will be wonderful. We have lots of little things planned. So, have a good one, and I'll see you next time for another First Look. Take care.